All right, continuing now in our series on idolatry, I'd just like to begin this discussion by just asking you a hypothetical question. What do you think God's opinion of patriotism is? How do you think he sees it? Does he see it as something that's vital to our spiritual growth, to the development, the inner development, and spiritual growth of a man or woman? What do you think God thinks of it? Now, the question is asked because in our culture today, patriotism is everywhere, and it's all across the political spectrum, right or left, believer or non-believer. Patriotism is all the rage. It's almost a religion in itself. And I think, well, how does God see it? Does it come up in the Bible? Does it appear very often? And in what cases does it appear? I think a good example, a good place to find it in the Old Testament is in the book of Exodus. Now, this was the time when, of course, Moses was leading the Israelites out of Egypt, part of the Red Sea. He was in the Sinai Valley. He was on the top of Mount Sinai. The people who were in the valley, they were getting restless, tired of waiting for him to come down the mountain, the Ten Commandments, talking to God. He was taking a very long time. And so their minds were idle, and they started thinking and coming up with ideas of how they got there, what Moses was doing, why he was getting on their nerves. And so they decided that maybe the nostalgic feelings they had of Egypt weren't so bad, because they had a smorgasbord there. They had all the provisions they could have asked for, even though they were slaves. They got kind of accustomed to the idols. They kind of accustomed to the false gods, the deities of the Egyptians. And so they began to think, well, maybe there was some power in them. So they constructed what we know as the golden calf. They took all their golden jewelry, all their fineness, all their whatever they could find, to construct a symbol, an idol they called a golden calf. And they said, this is what delivered you out of Egypt. And of course, the golden calf was a creation of their own hands. It was something they made with their minds, with their talents, with their natural abilities, and with their hearkening back to the false religion that they had just left. And so they had created all this. And then they said, this is what delivered us out of Egypt. This is what it was. So they started with God, as their deliverer, and they ended up worshiping a god made out of their own hands. And when you look at the history of the United States, you look at its origins, you look at what brought people to the country. Well, of course, there were people that wanted to escape the tyrannical reign of King George, a monarch who was cruel and unfeeling, and tried to keep every facet of his empire on a short leash, doing exactly what he wanted, allowing no free expression. It was corrupt, of course, and it was stifling to the individual. You had those people that wanted to escape that. And then you also had the Puritans. Now, these were people who I consider to be sort of like people in our church today in Veritas Triumphant. They wanted to escape the stodgy, dead, legalistic, and stifling religion all around them that was stifling their creativity and their power and their influence and their true self-expression and the reflection of God's glory and their spiritual gifts. That's what they were seeking. And they were coming out of an evil system, just as we are coming out of an evil system. They come to the New World. They put their stamp in their communities. They were not all prudish, as so many people believe. It's not the stereotype of them is not accurate. They were actually, the men were pretty lusty, and there was a fair amount of sexual sin and theft and carrying on and drunkenness, and like any other community, they were human. But they had a vision of a living religion. a living and powerful and dynamic religion that they felt that they could only express in the New World. And of course, when the country was forming in the colonies and universities were begun, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they were founded by Christian men, of course, who said and that their mission was to spread the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ through the entire continent and westward as part of manifest destiny, because they believed it was truly a Christian country, and spread it westward to evangelize the entire world. That was, if you can believe that, that was the mission of Yale, Princeton, and Harvard. So here we have a country in the wilderness, in the New World, completely dependent on God. Even if they were not all evangelical in their outlook, they knew what a monarchy did. They knew what tyranny looked like. And they came to the New World for true expression of their faith or their independence. And how are we any different than the Israelites in the desert? That is the question. As America plummets morally, and people say it's been plummeting since for many decades. Some say it was when they took prayer out of the public schools in 1962, when one miserable atheist decided that they were offended, and it was offensive, and it was discriminatory, or just unfair to other people who disagreed. This was adopted, and people have been rolling over ever since. God was thrown out of the classrooms. From then on, we've seen a steady decline and erosion of integrity, morals. We are plummeting into a cesspool. The America of today is barely recognizable in any way, shape, or form to the original America of its founding. And here we are. We are going into the abyss. So here we are. But why? Why? As we find ourselves drifting into this moral sewer and abyss, why does patriotism get louder and more celebratory and more gleeful, as if nothing's wrong? Is that an irony? Is that an irony that should escape us? Absolutely not. Because God said, righteousness exalteth a nation, and sin is a reproach to any people. God said, I will turn all nations into hell that forget me. And if we aren't approaching a pretty accurate and pretty vivid appearance of hell in our country today, then I don't know how much further you need to see us go. We are on a collision course with calamity and an apocalypse. There's no question about it. I was thinking of the British man of letters, Samuel Johnson. He was lived in the 1700s, and he was a Tory, British Parliament. He was a very upright man, had a great deal of integrity. He was early on in the abolitionist movement against slavery in Britain, and so he was a man to be listened to. He had a famous quote that I love. It was repeated very often during the Vietnam War era, if you were old enough to remember any of that. And his famous quotation said, "Patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel." Commenting, of course, on those who use this dodge, this default, sliding back into this excuse called patriotism. Well, patriotism, if you disagree with them, you're unpatriotic. And in our culture, that quote seems to apply not just to the last refuge of the scoundrel, but to first in every refuge. And we're all scoundrels when you think about it, because we all use left, right, we all use these tactics. Now, on the left side, with this immigration issue, we see them saying, well, everybody should just flow into the country as a natural right. They have every reason to be here. It's all because we're a nation of immigrants, and it's only fair we should welcome everybody, and the law be damned. Of course, lawlessness, anarchy, murder, rape, it all means nothing to them as long as they can secure a one-party system, run the Republicans and Conservatives off the charts, out of business. That's their goal, of course. Everybody knows it. They pander to this crowd. They don't care how many people get murdered. They are lawless anarchists. Evil, evil incarnate. Okay? That's that side. Then there's, of course, on the right, the conservatives, who, as we all know, just love money. And it's all just prosperity. So they love cheap labor. And they promise cheap labor, no union dues, none of that. So it's all just this whole thing of America the prosperous, America the financial icon of the world. That's all they're thinking about. So we have those. And then we have another horrible scourge that will always be with us, apparently, and that is centered in racism, of course. Racism, the scourge of the nation, never solved, never adequately repented of, never acknowledged in all its candor. Sure, there have been little band-aid measures, there have been certain laws passed, but racism apparently is a curse that America will endure forever and will never, ever escape from. Except because God declares that we shall love one another as ourselves, and the first great commandment is to love your God and your neighbor as yourself. I'm sorry, we just can't escape that one too easy. Sorry. But institutional racism is forever here. Apparently, it's the great scourge, almost split the country apart as soon as it was born, and now it's come back with a vengeance, and its latest ugly Hydra head manifestation appears in the police department. Yes, institutionalized police brutality, cops picking off unarmed black men randomly anytime they want for the sheer joy of killing, and loving every minute of it, because they're all throughout the police force. Now, yes, we must say not all policemen are racist. So make a good faith effort to uphold standards of decency and fairness. However, there is within every department a coterie, a little understood agreement that we don't turn people in, we don't report it fairly, and if things get a little bit too hairy, we turn our body cams off, because after all, we can always come up with a reason why we felt threatened. You know, a big burly policeman with a baton and a 2,000-pound car, you know, with windows, and we're supposed to believe, and a gun, we're supposed to believe that he's going to feel threatened by a kid who never draws a weapon. Okay? Believe that if you want. But I'm sorry, we know the score. And we know that the right is covering for them every chance they get. I'm so tired of turning on Fox News and seeing them talk about, you know, wring their hands and decry that the thin blue line is always being crossed. And these great men in blue are all righteous saints. And, you know, there's it's just a horrible unfairness. It's all a breakdown of law and order. And these NFL players, they're all just disgruntled millionaires. And here we go again. I mean, police brutality, if you're very young, you may not remember, it goes back way, way back. Not just Rodney King, it goes back to the 70s, the 60s, many riots in Detroit and LA and cities all over the country. So here it is, this scourge of racism as seen in institutionalized police brutality. Okay? So the right can pretend it's not happening. It's a very, very harsh and just disgusting reality. But we're patriots, so we ignore it because it's very inconvenient and it doesn't fit our agenda. We want to feel great about ourselves all the time. Okay, now, police brutality still lingers on. And then there is the 2,000-pound elephant in the room that nobody is talking about, right or left. And that is the ticking time bomb that we know as the federal deficit. $20 trillion. Do you know what that means? That means there's no future. That means this thing is going to blow up in our face. But not if you watch the business shows, not if you watch Il Cavuto, Ben Stein, all the mavericks, the experts, Maria Bartiromo on Fox News, on the business channels, that they believe in a surging economy. They believe it lifts all boats. They believe that we don't have to think about this anymore. Because apparently the law of economics, nothing trumps, pardon the pun, the burgeoning American economy, which is absolutely unsinkable, so they think. And yet, when we look into the book of Revelation, we see that within the 4th chapter, economic collapse is vividly portrayed, and it describes the day when a full day's wages will go to pay for one loaf of bread. So in other words, crazy inflation like a banana republic will be all around us, and certainly not no one in America will escape as they watch their 401ks dwindle to nothing and all turn to dust. They will find they're no different than any third-rate banana republic country. So those are the hard facts, and these are all protected through that false idol known as patriotism. So, even though Jesus doesn't speak of patriotism so often that you recognize it, I mean, he does talk about rendering unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and unto God the things that are God's. Tells us to pay our taxes. Yes, we should all do that. We should also, as Paul says, pray for those in authority and for the rulers, that they will be godly men. We do that for our leaders, for even the ones we disagree with vehemently. That we may live, as the Bible says, as much as possible, a peaceful and happy existence, and leave that to our children. That, of course, is the goal. That is a good thing to have for patriotism. That is what God would have us to do. And but of course it's not happening. We're using it as a default, as a shield, as a cloak for our passions and our wickedness and our self-serving ways and means. So, now, there's one last instance I can think of where patriotism really appears in its deadliest form, and of course that is in the book of Revelation and the Antichrist. Now, the Antichrist, of course, he says he's going to protect Israel during the tribulation. He's going to allow them to build their temple. He's going to allow them to have their sacrifice and their worship in the temple. And, of course, patriotism in his day will be him and him alone only. And you better take his mark, or else you won't be able to buy or sell, and you won't be able to eat, and you'll be cut off from all access to everything that he provides for you. So that will be the ultimate test of patriotism, the Antichrist kingdom and his wicked plans for the earth. That will be nothing to be patriotic about. So, patriotism, what is it? I do believe that God sees it as a useless sentiment. Nothing to really get excited about. Nothing wrong with the great institutions as they were written for this country. Nothing wrong with mom and apple pie. Nothing wrong with the great things that make this a fascinating country and a wonderful thing. If you want to go all out on the 4th of July and on Veterans Day or whatever, that's fine. But please, never use this. Never put your faith in this. This puts the blinders on, like any idol. It puts the blinders on. It doesn't. It impedes your growth. It doesn't show you God and His answers. Be patriotic about Israel. It's the only country on earth that God requires you to be patriotic about. It's the only country on earth that God will judge the nations and every individual to see if they are patriotic about this nation, because it is the apple of God's eye, and it is also where He will establish the New Jerusalem and His kingdom on earth, as Jesus says, "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done." So this is Pastor Allen, and I hope you enjoyed this this talk on patriotism. It is one of the most destructive forms of idol worship. And we'll continue on in this series and look forward to other broadcasts and seeing you again in the near future. Pastor Allen with Veritas Triumphant Church. Please go to the website, read the blogs, see other videos. Look forward to seeing you again very soon.